Tchia is a third-person action-adventure game that was featured in our upcoming games video that certainly caught my eye. It has some very unique ideas to it, and originally released back in March of 23 for other platforms. It's set in a fictional archipelago inspired by New Caledonia, which is a Pacific nation within the French Republic, and the developers themselves actually grew up here. Clearly a significant and influential part of the game's development. Is it the perfect place to visit on Switch, or is it Paradise Lost? Well, my name's Mark Walker. Welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. The storyline's interesting enough, and it's simple and captivates you from the get-go. Starting out with you and your father on a small island, living your lives. He gifts you with a glider, teaches you how to play the ukulele, but then unfortunately is kidnapped by the game's main antagonist. And with this main motivation of his rescue being firmly set in place, you head off on a raft to try and rescue him. Chia has some great ideas, but it also has some real missteps, so we'll go over those. First off, you've got a very large open world. It can feel a little sparse, but it does give you a number of different ways of getting around. The first of those I've already mentioned, and it's your raft. Now, when you're gliding across the waves at maximum speed, this is quite good. It controls easy enough. That is until you need to do anything but control the left and right, because you actually have to leave the steering, run to the sails, lower those up and down to change your speed, and you can also drop an anchor to completely stop. At any moment, you can jump off, dive beneath the waves and go looking for pearls, and that's one area Chia really shines. That's with its freedom. Now, unfortunately, those mechanics, they're not quite as practical as they certainly could have been when you're navigating small rivers, or you just decide to change direction. It just feels a little bit clunky. Now, I actually don't mind it most of the time, and I'm glad that it's a little more hands-on than it could have been. But there were a couple of annoying moments, and you'll find yourself pushing it back into the deep waters when you get yourself wedged in a load of mangroves. There are other things you can do with the boat as well, things like races, but generally you'll just be using it to get from A to B. Now, much of your time is going to be spent essentially taking part in a very large fetch quest. Even that main first storyline will require you to go out and retrieve certain items dotted about. And even with your raft, it can feel a little ponderous moving across this place. That is until you discover your soul jumping abilities. This is a great idea, and one that I think should have been so much more fleshed out. Basically what it means is whenever you come in contact with an animal, or any inanimate object in the game, you can actually soul jump into them with a stamina meter in the middle of the screen, which determines how long you can do that for. At its best times, it feels great stumbling across a fish, soul jumping into it, swimming across the water, transferring to a bird, and then soaring up above the skies before your stamina runs out and you use your little glider to make your way back down. That's very cool. And every single animal has its own special move, if you will. The crab can snap its claws, the dolphin can jump out of the water, but I couldn't help but just think, how much better would it have been if you needed specific animals for more of the game's actual questing? It feels like a cool thing that you can do that after a while you don't end up using nearly as much as you should. Having said that, it can be useful for moving more quickly, as the main character doesn't seem to be able to sprint, a cardinal sin in my opinion. Chia also has a very melodical aspect to it. There's a music mechanic that sees you using your ukulele and a few other local instruments to take part in musical rhythm games. While you don't have to complete these and there's no punishment for failing, it will give you a percentage so you can see how well you did. And some of the music in general and the songs are really nicely done. It's through the ukulele that you can also perform your soul abilities, things like changing the time of day. Again, a really cool mechanic, but it's not tied well enough to the core gameplay loop. The game seems to have taken some influence from other popular open world titles. For example, you can climb to high points and do a scream or a shout, and then that will reveal any interesting items or locations on your map. On that note, I do find it a little annoying that it doesn't pinpoint your exact position from the get-go. Instead, you can say, "Where am I?" and it will roughly triangulate your position. Sure, it makes logical sense, but in a game it's just a bit annoying at times. You'll find various campfires dotted around, as well as other points of interest that will be marked on your map, so you can use those to navigate with. And from the campfire you can change your outfit, cook up some food, although that's very simplistic and is just done for you, and of course sleep, but again, you can't choose when to sleep until. So if you want to get to the morning, sometimes it'll be late afternoon and you'll have to do it twice. It's just a bit odd. I want to say a few positive things about it because it feels like it's been a bit middling at this point. For a small development team, it's incredibly impressive the amount of detail they've gone to. For example, the ukulele mechanics. That is a fully fledged instrument. It has all the chords, you can bend notes, you can do minor chords and major. In essence, it's a full instrument within the game that you can play. There's even a free play mode so that you can enjoy just making music. Then you've got some of the traversal. Not only can you climb, sail, glide, possess those creatures and fly around for a bit, but there are a lot of little details in here, like being able to climb up a tree and sway it backwards and forwards before catapulting yourself into the water. There's an element of play that they clearly wanted to provide to the player so that you can just go off and, I guess, have fun. There is some challenge here as well. There are antagonistic creatures that look like they were made out of something you'd find in Hobbycraft. I have to be honest, their designs are a little janky, but you'll gain more offensive abilities as the game goes on. Still, combat certainly isn't at the heart of the experience. The issue for me with Tchia is it doesn't seem to know where it wants to sit. Does it want to be a relaxing, peaceful experience where it's all about exploration and to some extent simplicity? Or does it want to be something else? There are several moments that tell me they weren't quite sure about that. You have the aforementioned combat, but then you have the musical mini-games that put no incentive on the player to try any harder, other than an arbitrary number at the end of that section. I actually would have liked a bit more challenge there. I've already mentioned how I feel they should have used the navigation tied to the ability to possess different creatures, almost in a Metroidvania way. I guess it just left me feeling a little disjointed in terms of its overall mechanics. I can enjoy it, and certainly I was having fun, but it never had that special something, the magic sauce if you will. Now control wise, someone asked if I'd include XY axis information. Yes, you can change the XY axis as well as sensitivities. It is a particular game that would have benefited from gyro control because you use a slingshot and that feels very awkward. Even lowering the sensitivity down to 10% for aiming, it just doesn't feel good on Switch. So gameplay wise, it can be fun for sure, but doesn't make full use of the sum of its quite good parts. I give gameplay 13 out of 20. Controls are reasonable, they score 15 out of 20. Visually, Chia on Switch looks quite nice. It originally looked quite beautiful, using a lot of more advanced lighting effects on a reasonably simplistic art style when running at 60 FPS on other platforms. You do lose quite a bit of that while still maintaining, I think, the core artistic style, and there are times, certainly when you're sailing across the seas, where it looks really quite nice, but at other times just a little flat. Certainly some of the texture work's taken a hit, and the resolution has also suffered mildly, but frame rates are generally quite good. Apart from when it's raining, I've noticed there seems to be some kind of frame pacing issue. It makes the frame rate look much lower than it actually is. Generally it's 30 locked out though, and it's one that I do prefer to play in handheld mode. I'd say the game's strongest aspect is actually the soundtrack. This was composed by John Robert Matz, and it's an excellent piece of work. And there's quite a bit of voice work in the native languages, those being French, and I think it's Dreu, but apologies if I pronounced that completely incorrectly. But I'd say voice work and musicality really are the beating heart of Tchia, even when some of its other gameplay mechanics didn't quite captivate me as much as I thought they would. Visuals and performance combined score 15 out of 20, while the sound and audio scores 17 out of 20. Chia seems to be launching with a couple of different versions. You've got the base game and the OLED edition, which I believe comes with some different cosmetics. But let's look at the base game. It has an RRP of £26.99. You could finish the main game in around about 7 or 8 hours. But for completionists, in fairness, there's a lot to do on the island if you're inclined enough to go looking for it. And the ukulele is pretty sweet. It has a download size of 6.3 gigs. For me personally, the gameplay didn't quite click. It's going to be different for everyone, and I guess you'll know based on what I've said, but I would give value 13 out of 20. Tchia was a difficult game to review. I can objectively see the positives, but it's one where it didn't quite captivate me as much as I feel the mechanics could have done, leaving it just feeling a little disjointed. Personally, if I was a fan of the genre, I'd be looking at picking it up on a sale. It still gets a respectable score of 73%. Let me know in the comments, is this one you've been looking at? Are you considering picking it up? And as always, hopefully you enjoyed it, and let me know down there. Thank you to our Patreons, our members, all of you that enjoy the content, and as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!